Hi, AP Psychology students, and welcome back. Today we are continuing with our final unit, and we are moving on to the topic of positive psychology. So today the learning objectives that we are going to talk about is explain how positive psychology approaches the study of behavior and mental processes, and explain how positive subjective experiences apply to behavior and mental processes. Ultimately, we're going to get at both of these objectives through our essential question, which is how can we increase well-being, resilience, and positive emotions? So when we talk about positive psychology, right, it's important that we first just orient ourselves to what it is. So it is a branch of psychology, so it's like a subfield of psychology. And just like health psychology focuses on the impact stress has on our lives, positive psychology focuses on human strengths and potential, right? So really the goal of this subfield is to understand what makes life worth living, right? And to contribute to our psychological well-being, and really shifts the focus from treating mental illness or dealing with disorders or dealing with human struggle to promoting mental wellness. So the idea is that instead of focusing on the things that make us sick or sad, we focus on the things that make us flourish and happy and make us, kind of thrive. So there's a few key goals of positive psychology. The first one is just identifying these factors that lead to well-being, right? Like what are some of the things that we know through research can increase well-being? And two of them are gratitude and focusing on our signature strengths. We also study positive emotions, so just learning more about happiness and factors that contribute to it, or what it looks like or what it doesn't look like, and how it changes over time. Understanding resilience development, so figuring out how people can become more resilient in the face of growing stress and trauma. And like I said, promoting positive or psychological health, right? So using all of the information that we're learning to make evidence-based interventions so that we can focus on mental wellness as opposed to mental illness. Okay, so one of the things that positive psychology really focuses on is the impact of gratitude. So gratitude is defined as the recognition and appreciation of the good things in life, right? And research shows that practicing gratitude, right, by showing your gratitude, writing down things you're grateful for, expressing words of thanks to others, it increases your overall happiness, your life satisfaction, your well-being, and your social connections. And simple practices like a gratitude journal, where you would write down 3 things that you are grateful for that day, shows measurable benefits. So it's not just like, kind of kumbaya, like everybody's happy. There's real changes in the brain and body. So we know from looking at brain scans in different experimental methods that it boosts serotonin and dopamine. Both of those are related to happiness and well-being. It decreases cortisol, which is the negative, kind of the one of the negative impacts of stress, can be too much cortisol. And it also releases oxytocin, and that can lower blood pressure, right? Oxytocin is the bonding hormone that makes us feel closer to others. Another topic that positive psychology researches is this idea of signature strengths. So signature strengths are personal traits that feel authentic and energizing. And the idea is that, yes, people have different kind of like areas where they may be stronger than others. But ideally, what you'd want to learn is how to harness each of these strengths in different areas or times of your life when they would be needed. Right? And so what they did to create these 6 strengths is there's 24 different kind of like characteristics or character traits, and they organized them using that factor analysis and kind of grouped them into bigger categories of wisdom, courage, humanity, justice, temperance, and transcendence. Now, research shows that the benefits of knowing about, using, growing your signature strengths, practicing them, lead to higher levels of happiness, increased well-being, better performance at work, and better relationships between, those in your surroundings, in your circle. And regular practice, like really working on these signature strengths, makes life better, right? You see, enhances those positive experiences in your existence. Okay, so on the topic of happiness, right, one of the other key things was learning about happiness. What we've realized is, from some research, is that the factors that impact happiness. So this is really significant because it gave us an insight into what does and does not impact your overall happiness. Most people think that red 10% is actually more like 90% of your happiness. So it's your circumstances, what happens to you. I'll be happy when, I'll be happy if I did this, if I got this, if this was this, if this was this, right? But actually what research shows is that's only about 10% of your happiness. That 50% of your happiness is related to your genes, but 40% of your happiness is related to your intentional activities, right? The way you perceive life, the things that you choose to do, your personal daily activities that impact your overall happiness. So what are some of these things that the 50%, like what are some of the different things that come forth when we look at this 50% or the 40%, sorry? Is this feel good, do good phenomenon. So the idea is that happiness kind of builds on each other or on itself. So if you feel good, if you're happy, then you do good, and then doing good makes you feel good, which makes you do good, makes you feel right. So the idea is that happiness builds on happiness. And we talked about this earlier when we talked about the broaden and build theory of emotions. One of the reasons why that 10%, right, that we see that is not genetics, right, that red 10%, is such a small part is because we are prone to this idea of adaptation. So what happens is something happens to you in your life, good or bad, and we think that event, good or bad, so you like win the lotto or you lose your job, we think that that's going to impact our overall happiness. But what happens actually is that we get used to that new level of equilibrium, and over time our happiness goes back to the set point, because it's more based on the way that we perceive our lives and the choices that we make daily than the big things that happen to us. And another way that we can really impact our own happiness is by focusing on this idea of relative deprivation, that we are always comparing ourselves to others, right? And that's part of that 40%. Like, how can you change that comparison, right? And not compare yourself to others, or look at the comparison differently in a way to change your perspective. Okay, so the next topic that they focus on is this resilience and post-traumatic growth. So if we take a look, the definition of post-traumatic growth is just positive psychological change following a trauma. So if you look at this graph, you can see that there's a couple different ways that people respond to trauma. So there's resilience, which is just like you have a level of functioning and you kind of go back to baseline, you kind of go back to your level of functioning after a trauma. There is recovery, where you do suffer some, kind of negative impacts of a trauma, but you end up moving towards baseline and getting back up to where you originally were at, the level of functioning. And then there's post-traumatic growth, right? Which is people who actually have greater functioning after the trauma than they did before, right? So they have deeper relationships, more personal strength, greater spiritual development, more appreciation for life. So the trauma actually caused them to grow. Right? And both of the blue lines or the blue kind of delayed symptoms or chronic, might be more what we think of with post-traumatic stress disorder, right? Now, we don't know exactly why one person goes through post-traumatic stress versus post-traumatic growth. They're still researching this, but we do know that post-traumatic growth is possible, and learning more about it will help us, learn interventions that can make this more possible for more people. Okay, so in summary, what are some of the different evidence-based practices that we can use to increase our well-being? First, daily gratitude exercises, right? Second is, you can work on spotting your strengths. There's a test that you can take online, scientifically valid test created by, some of the founders of positive psychology, who will tell you your top 5 strengths and the different areas where you have room to grow. Mindfulness practices, so working on kind of calming and quieting the mind, they find can greatly add to your overall well-being. Goal setting practices that align with your values, working on building resilience, and cultivating positive relationships. So today we talked about positive psychology. We focused on different areas that they study, research methods or research findings that they've had, and ways to improve your overall well-being. So make sure you can answer these essential questions. That's all for now, AP Psychos, and remember, psychology is flippin' awesome.